the things that are working and enabling the situation, and what are the things that perhaps making it somewhat more difficult or hindering it? I'm interested in some of your views on that after such an illustrious amount of reflective working period.
Well, I mean, a lot of my answers to this are going to be political. I mean, in the sense that
okay, and if it's politics, then tell us. Yes.
I mean, I believe in grassroots activism.
Yep.
And I also believe in a controlled, accountable role for government in providing certain conditions for a civilized society. So, in other words, I do think that society should provide, that we should all agree that we will contribute to provide certain things to make society better. But at the same time, I also very much believe in solidarity and, as you say, building things from the ground up. So, and often those things get built where the government doesn't provide. So, you know, where there are gaps, and then people with energy and vision come and build things. And I'm quite supportive of both of those views. So, in a way, there's a sort of tension between that. Recently, you know, the governments of this country take a view on drug and alcohol, particularly around drugs. I mean, let's say in my career, we've got the end of Thatcher and we've got the Blair government, Brown government, etc. And certain kind of social problems arose. So drug-related crime became a big moral panic in the 90s. And money, you know, the first drug strategy comes out. The first drug strategy actually was under the Conservatives, and it was called Tackling Drugs to Build a Better Britain. I mean, I think first time I saw it, I thought it was Taking Drugs to Build a Better Britain. But anyway, those strategies turned into a kind of attack on drug-related crime. So instead of it being a health issue, and Jerry Stimson got very exercised and angry about this, he said, you know, basically the government are taking this away from health and they're putting it into the domain of crime, and that harm reduction really is about reducing crime as opposed to reducing health harms. And so things like that get driven. So, you know, there was a very successful drive in one sense to put everybody onto opioid substitution treatment. There was, you know, in the 90s, huge numbers of people got quickly onto prescriptions of methadone usually, and it did reduce crime. I mean, you know, kind of people were satisfied with that. You know, the drug-related crime went down. It had been inflated and distorted in various ways that Alex Stevens has explained, but nevertheless, it was effective. But it didn't really do anything to help anybody, because it produced this next problem that people were on this quite powerful sedative drug and weren't really offered any kind of pathways out of it, and family members would complain, look, you know, my addicted son's been sat on the couch on methadone for 10 years and nothing's happening. And, you know, all of this is a slight caricature, but it was a real issue. And as you know, it came to light when the BBC did a thing about people being parked on methadone. So there's this sudden, and that kind of rang a bell with the kind of conservative think tanks, and they all began to think, oh, recovery, well, you know, we shouldn't be having people on drugs, and we shouldn't have been having people parked on methadone. They all need to get abstinent. So we got this big drive, and people began to tell them that, oh, the 12-step fellowships work, you know, we'll get everybody into AA and NA. And what's best about that is they don't cost anything, you know, so it's a cheap solution. So there was a great swing away from, in the Cameron government, from, you know, we'll stick everybody on long-term substitution treatment. Instead, we'll get everybody into NA and AA, and everyone will become abstinent. Well, needless to say, that didn't work either. And in fact, as you know, the civil service work to keep the government's strategies kind of vaguely in the world of reality, or they used to do so. You know, so that actually the harm reduction strategies continued anyway. Alcohol was entirely neglected. You know, so there was an alcohol strategy called ARSE, you know, AHRSE, and you know, I think Doug Cameron wrote an article said they don't call it ARSE for nothing. It was a ridiculous non-strategy it had no resources attached to it. It put everything back onto the responsibility of the drinks industry and on the individual drinker. It didn't really provide anything. And in fact, despite a lot of people tirelessly trying to provide good alcohol services, it's been grievously underfunded, underserved, underrecognised, and so on. And people generally wake up to things when there's a big social problem associated with it. So I think politically, recently, just to bring me to the point, there's been this Carol Black, who is a marvellous person, very powerful, very influential, very articulate, who drove through two reports about the problems of drugs in particular and what we should be doing about it. And the government said, oh, yes, very, very nice, Dame Carol, and we'll definitely act on it. And now we see what we've always seen, which is that the promise of funding for this or that or the other is either wasted, because a great deal of it is wasted, or it's put into the traditional categories that are recognisable. So commissioning people to provide rather traditional services, and those people have what we might call spray-on recovery. You were asking earlier about what's the difference between treatment and recovery. Well, one of the differences is not, there's a way, as we've discovered or talked about already, where treatment and recovery are fit together very nicely. And, the key to the garden door is the analogy that I drew. But in many cases, it's the provision of substandard services, not by design. I mean, people don't intend to deliver substandard services, but there are these massive organisations which hoover up contracts for statutory services. They often bid at unrealistically low levels to win the contract. They then can't do it for that amount. And then they have to go back and ask for more. They subcontract to people who can't possibly deliver what they're being asked to do for the money that's being offered. And so in a way, you see the sort of disappointment. And I see this already. I mean, I'm beginning to see people very high up in the kind of drug and alcohol political world beginning, their hearts are sinking because they can see that this great promise of the Dame Carol Black reports is being squandered. So I think that's one of the things that doesn't work. I mean, if I look across the Atlantic, I also see massively funded programs like the 70s and 80s, the NIAAA and the NIDA, billions of dollars there, and they did a lot of good things. But again, there's a sort of under delivery there as well. So what helps, I think, is also, again, new directions. Just to go right back to new directions, there's such an emphasis on the really sharp end of the problem. So when people think about drug addiction or alcoholism or whatever they like to call it, they're thinking about somebody who's really impaired, severely dependent, needs very drastic interventions, as opposed to the fact that actually alcohol problems and drug problems are spread out through the community in different forms, different severities, different manifestations.